20 years, so I'm gonna do that.
I'm going in 20, 30, 55 days.
Oh,
3 days. I'm taking our teenagers over winter break.
oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah. Wish me luck. 10 teenagers for a week in Israel.
Oh,
No, Heather Ayers and I, our educator, are co-leading the trip.
I'll be Shavera for you before you come back, rest and healing.
That's all right.
10 teenagers.
That'll be fun.
I love going to their teams. They're fantastic.
You'll take your vitamin B.
All right, we are.
Be bringing Cedric.
All right, it's 11 a.m. It's Friday. Do you know where your children are? I know where mine are. It's cool. No, good morning, everyone. Early Shabbat Shalom. It's great to be with you for this week of Parsha Perspectives. As some of you noticed, I'm looking at you, Tara, that I put a little teaser out that we are going to be exploring a morally questionable episode in this week's Parsha, of which there are a series of episodes. So join me in the bracha for the study of Torah, and then we'll get right into it. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praise you, Adonai, our God, rule of the universe. You make us holy with commandments and command us to engage in words of Torah. So Lech Lecha is obviously the beginning of the story of Abraham. And Abraham is told by God, Lech Lecha me'artzecha, go forth from the land of your ancestors, the land that I will show you. And then very quickly, just a few verses into the chapter, we get into a story that already Abraham's moral compass is called into question. And so what I'm going to invite us to do today is we're going to read the episode in translation first, and then we'll walk through some of the commentaries about it. There was a famine in the land. And the land we are talking about is the land of Canaan, the land that Abraham was pointed to go to, not the land in Mesopotamia that he had come from. So he has already fulfilled the vision of Leching. He has left. Lecha himself, he is gone. And he gets to the land, and what happens the first time he gets there? There's a famine. Thanks a lot, God. Right? Like, we have food, right? But he follows. And so he goes from the land down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. Now, we know, because we've read ahead, that the trope of there being a famine in the land, but there being food in Egypt, is a story to which we shall return. But why does that happen? What is going on that when there's a famine in the land, it seems like there's always food in Egypt? Why is that?
The Nile.
Yeah, thanks, Marilyn. The Nile River, right? There is, for those of you who have been to Israel, you know that there are parts of the land which are very arable, right? The northern area, the Galilee, is very arable. And the southern area, the Arava, the Negev Desert, not so arable without, a lot of intervention. And yes, our Zionist ancestors made the desert bloom, fulfilling Ben-Gurion's vision. But 3,500 years ago, Ben-Gurion was not making, hoses that had little holes poked in it to soak around the plant so they could actually make it grow. And we know that Israel very much is on a rain cycle. It rains in the winter, it's dry in the summer, and those rains are necessary for the agricultural cycle. And if it don't rain, then they don't grow. Exactly. And so it is an area that is very susceptible to famine. Egypt has a natural flow of fresh water, right? The Nile River, coming all the way up from southern Africa. And so even when there were famines in the outside the Fertile Crescent in the land of Israel, there was often food available in Egypt because they had more food even then. All right. So Abram and Sarai decide to go down to Egypt when there's a famine. As he was about to enter Egypt, He said to his wife Sarah, I know, my darling, my dearest, my beautiful wife, how beautiful you are. If the Egyptians see you and think she is his wife, they will kill me and let you live. Please say that you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that I may remain alive thanks to you. Okay. When Abram entered into Egypt, the Egyptians saw how very beautiful the woman was. Pharaoh's courtiers saw her and praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's palace. And because of her, it went well for Abram. He acquired sheep, oxen, asses, male and female slaves, she-asses, and camels. But the Eternal afflicted Pharaoh and his household with mighty plagues on account of Sarai, the wife of Abram. Pharaoh sent for Abram and said, what is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her as my wife? Now, here is your wife. Take her, please. Take her and be gone. And Pharaoh put agents in charge of him, and they sent him off with his wife and all that he possessed. It's short. It's 10 verses, 11 verses.
It's a year in Torah study.
It's a year in Torah study. But what is the moral quandary that we see in this story? Marilyn.
He saved his life, he sold his wife as a sex slave.
He saved his wife, he saved his life, he sold his wife as a sex slave. Okay. Other folks want to tell the same story a different way. Spencer.
He used his wife to defraud Pharaoh, gain a lot of possessions, and then he was kicked out of the land, but then let him keep the possessions.
And that's 2 million.
He used his wife to defraud Pharaoh, kept the possessions when Pharaoh kicked him out. Also true. Others.
But I'm all for defrauding Pharaoh, I want to be clear.
This Pharaoh's not a bad guy. It's not the same Pharaoh as the Moses story. He's the king of Egypt.
At least he gave her back.
At least he gave her back, right? Like, let's take for a moment, and I don't want to get too far ahead. How many, let's ask ourselves for 1 second. If you're in Pharaoh's shoes, and this guy does to you what Abram did to you, what might you be tempted to do?
Off the head of Abraham.
Yeah, you throw Abram in the dungeon, and if he's lucky, you don't cut his head off. Pharaoh didn't do that. Right.
Very forgiving Pharaoh.
Yeah. Maddie.
I think he misjudged Pharaoh.
Abram misjudged Pharaoh.
Misjudged. He thought that he would be killed and that he's evil, and in the end, he pardoned him. He allowed him, even after a dirty deed, allowed him to go free.
Okay, so Maddie suggests that part of this was Abram having a suspicion of how he would be treated by Pharaoh, and that was obviously a suspicion that was not well founded, because Pharaoh didn't in fact behave that way. Well, we'll never really know, except that once Pharaoh learned that Abram was Sarai's husband, he sent them away. Now the plagues probably had something to do with that. Nirvana.
My version. Don't deceive a man and give him a woman. Let him find his own woman.
Don't deceive a man and give him a woman, let him find his own woman. Fair enough. Fair enough. Anyone in the peanut gallery, Liliana, Jack, Cindy, David, any of you have anything you want to add? Margie, you're hiding there as well. You can pass. I'm just throwing it out there. Okay. Jack, go ahead.
You know, obviously, we know very little about Abraham. We know that his wife is barren, that the question of him marrying one of his brother's sisters is still in question. And God comes to him and says, I want you to go somewhere. And Abraham says, sure, I'll go. He doesn't say, I'm leaving everything I care about. Obviously, this being forgiven by the Pharaoh here is a divine intervention, in my opinion, because anybody in their right mind would have done something to Abraham, but the Pharaoh doesn't.
Yeah, so the only thing I would say to that, Jack, is that some of the things you alluded to, like Sarah's barrenness, haven't really played out yet, right? This is the first chapter of our story of Abram, right? It begins at chapter 12 with Abram's call to go from his homeland. So, like, again, we're reading, and it's like, there's a historical literary way to read, which is that if is there foreshadowing, and but of course, for us, there is no before and there is no after in Torah. The Torah is an entire story delivered all at once. And so it is perfectly kosher to read this story through the lens of what we know Abram and Sarai will become. That is the deeply Jewish way to read the story. And so we can do that as well. Spencer.
Got a question.
Yeah.
So we didn't have the commandments yet, or any of the mitzvot, but would this have offended God?
Would what have offended God?
Abraham's actions, defrauding.
That's the question. That's the question that I am raising for us today. I'm going to give you the short answer, which is we know that it offended God. How do we know that? Because God sent a plague, right? God was bothered by this. The question is, by whom, right? Is God bothered by Pharaoh taking another man's wife as a wife? But he didn't know, right? And or is God offended by Abram for the fraud that he perpetrated against Pharaoh? If we read the story in one way, the answer is the first one, right? If God was mad at somebody, who is he going to send the plague? Who's God going to send the plague down to?
That person.
That person. Who was the recipient of the plague?
Not that person.
Well, Pharaoh. Pharaoh is the recipient of the plague. So it might suggest that God is mad at Pharaoh. Might. Marcia.
So you realize we're saying that Abraham defrauded Pharaoh, and that's the bad thing. So the bad thing is Abraham says to his wife, hey, go with that guy and it'll make it better for me. That's not a bad thing? I don't hear that anywhere.
I'm saying this is what I'm saying is, again, like we are reading what the text says, but I'm coming here to say, let's talk about Abram and his behavior. Maddie.
I think it took a lot for Abram to stand back and to see what was going on with his wife. So in a way, he made a sacrifice.
Right. Right. So here's what I want to say, not as a defense of Abram, but just as a context. We are all reading this story through our own lenses. We are all reading the story as 21st century postmoderns for whom gender politics is A, very important to our community, and B, very, very, very different than it was back then. Let's remind ourselves of what would have happened in this story if Abram was in fact Sarai's brother and not husband. What would have been this? How would the story have gone? Abram would have presented his sister to the courts as a potential suitor for Pharaoh. And if Pharaoh had wanted to marry Sarai, what would the appropriate course of action be?
He marries Sarai.
He marries Sarai under what conditions?
He also gave a lot of gifts.
Right, there would be a bride price and a dowry, right? We are talking about a world in which women were chattel. Women went from the possession of their father or their brother or their next closest male relative to the possession of their husband, with certain mutual responsibilities in both directions. Different responsibilities, right? The responsibilities of husbands / brothers / next closest male kin to a woman to provide for her safety and her financial security was transferred to her husband, who also was responsible for her safety and her financial security, but also the sexual part of their relationship as well. Spencer.
There were prime prices in the 1880s in New York among Jews.
Yes, there were, and there, so
That's
like.
terrible, but
That's pre-modern. We are saying this from the modern, postmodern perspective of the 21st century. You're right, that from the 18 whatevers all the way back to the 18 whatevers BCE, when we're talking about here, that reality is the reality. Now, Abram is bucking that reality, but we have to keep in mind the reality that would have been the quote unquote moral reality of his time, as we question the morality of his behavior, which I'm going to say he bucked. But the degree to which he bucked it is an important conversation. All right, Jack.
You know, when I read these stories, the question I have to ask is, we give God anthropomorphic characteristics. God should have known this was happening, unless God realizes, if it's so, that by letting man have some freedom of choice on what he does, he's watching to see actually where he's failed. I mean, the story of Noah, to me, is a story of God's failures, not a story of Noah bringing animals and everything into the world. God should have known that man's Yetzer Hara is greater than the Yetzer HaTov. Here, we also give God this anthropomorphic characteristics where, if you look at it, God let this play out to see what man would do, and rather than give him then God not knowing this was going to happen.
So there's a particularly theologically oriented perspective on the story. It's not a bad perspective. It's not a wrong perspective. It's a perspective that lives in parallel with, I think, the humanistic story, which is, how do we judge the characters in the story for their own behaviors? And then we can ask ourselves, and where is God in the story, right? We know that God is one of the players in the story because God sends down the plagues. But as I alluded to last Friday at Shabbat services, this larger theologic question of God's relationship with humanity, God's expectations of humanity, the creation of humanity with the Yetzer Hara as being part and parcel with the creation of humanity. And we know that conversation that God had with the heavenly hosts of, should we even create humanity? Because if we create humanity, we are introducing a Yetzer Hara into the otherwise perfect universe. That's a big question to answer. And it gets answered. It gets answered when God says, let us create humanity in our image. Right? So not to dismiss that gloss, Jack, but like, God's in whole hog on humanity. We're here. And we are going to meet God's expectations at times, and we are going to not meet God's expectations at times. But I don't want us to absolve ourselves of our moral responsibilities by saying, oh, God created us to make mistakes. I want us to ask the question, what responsibilities do we have? Because the other way to read the Yetzer Hara is actually to take God out of all of this, and to say, God didn't just create us with the Yetzer Hara, God created us with the Yetzer HaTov as well. And the only question that matters is, what do we do with it? Not what does God want us to do with it, or what responsibility does God have for what we did and didn't do. We are responsible for our decisions.
That's post-modern.
But it's not just postmodern. It's also in our tradition, right? This is why over and over and over again we're told this is the right and this is the wrong. This is why in the prophets it says, doing right is right and doing wrong is wrong. And that we are going to be making these decisions, whether it's the individual Israelites up to the king of Israel and even our biblical heroes and ancestors. All right. So I really want to dig into, what was Abram thinking? Right? Because he's certainly trafficking. Well, in trafficking, he's participating in human trafficking. He's trafficking his wife. He's trafficking his wife. He is using her for his financial gain. He is using her agnostic of her consent. Right? And this is, I mean, listen, I am very much adding 2025 language and 21st century sexual mores and morals onto this, but it feels really icky to me. Maddie,
From the
Maddie,
I don't know this, but maybe you can illuminate. Is there any way in our tradition that says if we do something for a reason that may be not so good or immoral, but having the intention of a greater good in mind, that it's okay? I know in other, other religions, that works.
Yeah.
But do we have that, for the deceiving for the purpose of, a reason higher than that?
okay, so fair question. And in general, I would say it happens a lot and doesn't make it right. Right? I don't think you can say it is or is not our moral compass, because there are moments in our story when those things happen, right? And what you're gonna see, and it's gonna surprise me a little bit when I read it, is that the commentary, all the way up to include the women's Torah commentary published by the leaders of our movement in our generation, are not nearly as comfortable castigating Abram as I am around some of this. But at the same time, subjugating someone else's humanity and dignity, whether it's for personal financial gain or even to protect your life, is a moral question that, if you're going to say yes to it, it's incredibly sticky. It's incredibly sticky to say that's a yes, that I don't think we should ever feel like we can universalize that decision to say, so it makes it okay. And that's what Abram does here. He subjugates Sarai's humanity and dignity, for, at the very most to protect his own life, but at the very least for financial gain.
He's a bimp.
That's a word, right? That's a word. We can talk about that. What's that, Grace?
I didn't know that he was a pimp.
Yes, he did.
Yes, he did. No, he didn't. No, that was just how you do it. That's right.
Right.
He didn't.
Well, I mean, yes, but here's things to how you do it, but he knew what he was doing.
So is there another story that you can think of where the male decided to tell the female, go marry the king so it will go well for us?
Sarah. Esther.
Esther, right? So about 5 or 10 years ago, there was a really funny comedy sketch in Israel where it imagined that kitchen table conversation between Mordecai and Esther, or excuse me, Mordecai and Hadassah, really, where Mordecai says to Hadassah, I have an idea. Why don't you go dress yourself up and seduce the king and make him marry you, and then we will reap the benefits. And she says, well, it sounds a little bit like prostitution. He's like, no, you're misunderstanding here. It's not really prostitution. It's just you convincing the king to marry you so we can all reap the benefits. And she's like, it feels like, and of course, what makes it so funny is that it's true.
I tend to agree with, or in the sense with Clarice, that you're indicting Abraham for the offense. Nevertheless, I thought it was not premeditated. If it were, then of course, then he was a trafficker. But the fact that he actually got into Egypt and then made a proposition.
It wasn't premeditated. Really? Really? As he was about to enter Egypt.
That is when he made the proposition.
Before he is in Egypt.
But
No one's making him go to Egypt.
It was not at his house. And although
He's a sojourner. He is a sojourner. He is on a journey. And so no, he did not leave his house in Ur with the intention of selling his wife into sexual servitude.
And that's what Paris probably
right.
indicated.
But this wasn't like Pharaoh has him with a knife to his throat and says, let her marry me or you die. This is premeditated. Premeditated, like pre-need arrangements for a funeral is, if they're alive, it's pre-need. If he's not under a threat of Pharaoh, it's premeditated. He made this decision. Now, don't take it from me. We're going to read the medieval rabbis. All right. So Rashi, yeah, Jack, go ahead before I move on, and I move forward.
Just one thing in this Lech Lecha, unlike the other that I know of, God does promise Abraham something. He promises he will be a father of a great nation. After all, his wife is shown to be barren in a time when your worth was the size of your family. And
Not
God promises he'll be a father of a nation, taking for that his prodigy will do this rather than being the father like George Washington of a nation. The interpretation is you will get this. You will have, I am rewarding you for doing this. The question comes up many times is, does Abraham do this for what he gets out of it?
Jack, you are right that God has made Abram the promise that he'll be a father of great nations. Sarai's barrenness has not been mentioned yet. This is the 10th verse of Lech Lecha.
Oh, I think it has.
I'm looking at it in front of me, Jack. It's only verse through 9. He goes with Sarai, right? God, I'll make you a blessing. He goes with Lot. They leave Haran. He goes with Sarai and all of his wealth, and they go to Canaan, and they go to Shem and the Terebinth and Moreh. And God says in verse 7, I will give you this land. And Abraham makes an altar, and then he goes to Bethel. And then he goes to the Negev, and that's where our story begins. So Sarai's barrenness is not yet in the story. Now, again, as I said before, we know she's barren. And our tradition has no problem reading her barrenness into the story. But I know that you're a stickler for history. And so I'm going to say that in the story to this point, we don't know of Sarai's barrenness. But I'm not exactly sure how it plays into the story. I'm going to move us forward. So we're going to focus mostly on the verse that says, please say that you are my sister, that it may go well for me because of you, and that I may remain alive thanks to you. That to me is the operative verse in the story, because it is when, I'm not going to take your question, Spencer, just yet, because it's when Abram decides to pull the subterfuge. It's when he decides to lie, either by omission or by commission, about Sarai's marital status. It opens him up to receive benefits from the lie. That makes it fraud. But also invokes his fear of death. Right? There's 3 phrases here. Say that you are my sister, that it may go for me, and that I may remain alive thanks to you. What's interesting is you would think that this remaining alive would be preeminent to going well for him, but we'll see. So Rashi says, what does Abram mean when he says that it may go well for me? That they may give me presents. Like a 7-year-old getting ready for Hanukkah. Right? This is exactly what Rashi says. His grandson, Rashbam, says, since you must away, tell them to save my life, that you are not my wife. Tell them something else, I think it's anyway. Tell them something that will do me good. It was the custom to give presents to the women's relatives. So what Rashbam is saying is, and this is why Dravana, it's even more premeditated than you think it is Abram not only had to think about what his strategy was going to be, but he also had to think about tactics. Okay? The presumption is that if Abram walks into Egypt with his wife Sarai, he knows what the outcome will be. What will that outcome be?
According to him,
they are going to kill him, at which point she is no longer married to him, and they will take her as a wife to somebody. And I need to couch that in this moral question, right? Because it is not right of us to impose our moral framework on him when he is living in a different moral framework, right? He is fearful of something that we, Baruch Hashem, don't live in fear of anymore, right? In our society, we are not walking around worried that someone is going to kill me to take my wife. Okay?
If he was thinking, and his thinking was not uttered, then of course.
That he was not what?
If he was thinking of given his wife accordingly to the scriptures that we read, or whether if he did not mention his thought, then it could not be entered into evidence that he committed any offense.
Someone's phone is ringing.
His thought is not admissible.
You think? I turned it off.
It's coming from over there somewhere. So here's the thing, we don't know what he's thinking, but what Rashbam says is, all right, listen, something bad is going to happen. Something disappointing is going to happen. Either they're gonna kill me and take you away. Teresa, you may want to turn this
I'm
image down
turning
to
the
you.
whole screen.
Thank you. So either they're gonna kill me and take you away, or we're gonna do something else that's gonna leave with you taking away. But if you're gonna have to go away, maybe we can find a way to make it go better for us than my death. Right? I am now reading this as generously as possible for Abram. Spencer.
He's laying it on pretty thick. I might die unless,
Well, I mean, listen, that's what he says.
but it's the last thing he says. And I think that's why I think he's laying it on pretty thick.
Okay, like that's your read on it, which is fair.
I think he was charming her with the word die rather than fair.
Right. And remember, Rashi, Rashbam, our middle-aged author, our middle-aged commentators, who are they wanting to champion? Abraham, right? They're gonna interpret this, right? When there are blanks to be filled in, when there is room between the lines, they are gonna put into the lines a way to justify Abraham's behavior as best they can, right? And so by articulating, as Rashbam does, something's gonna happen to me anyway, let's figure out a way to benefit us. His Cooney, a little bit later, also France. Abraham reasoned that if the Egyptians were to ask him if Sarai was a married woman, he would respond by claiming that her husband had abandoned her. The Egyptians would therefore have no reason to kill him on account of her absent husband, and they would leave her alone. Okay? So this is a very interesting way to play off the corners of the wall, right? A way for Abram to say, she's not my wife, but she's somebody's wife. And he's abandoning her. I like it. Marshall loves it.
Love, love.
Here's the problem. He didn't say that. Right? Now, we don't know what he did and didn't say. All we know is that Abram told them that he was his sister. They praised her. They took her. They gave Abram stuff. We don't know. Did they ever ask, who is this woman? They just said, marriage material? Right? So what's interesting about Chizkuni's comment is if the story was that she is married to somebody else, not a whole lot of protest from Abram and Sarai to say, actually, she's already married. Right? Chizkuni suggests that the Egyptians would therefore have no reason to kill him on account of her absent husband, and they would leave her alone. But they didn't leave her alone. What did they do? They took her to Pharaoh's palace, and they rewarded Abram like you reward a brother who is marrying off his sister.
So if they were just friends and absent husbands, nothing would happen.
Well, no, this is part of the sister story, right? She is my sister.
Thinking?
What's that?
Can you imagine what Sarah is thinking?
I wish someone had written this. So, some of you were with me last year when we studied that new collection of Midrashim called Dirshuni, which are all of these stories of the experiences of women in the Hebrew Bible, where, like the untold story of what was going on in Sarah's mind during the binding of Isaac. And I thought for sure there was going to be a midrash that one of those wonderful scholars had written about what's going through Sarai's mind during this story. And I have to write to the editor and say, I'd love to hear how you might interpret that, right? Because not that I would write it myself, but like what I appreciate about that collection is it's only coming from female voices. And I don't have one of those. But yeah, like what is going on through Sarai's mind? Like Hizkuni frames this as a beautiful way to complete the ruse in a way that is no longer morally problematic. Right? Because Hizkuni's goal is let's just get through this without losing our necks. Right? Now, it would mean that Abraham would not be able to enrich himself, but that would be okay. It just means that Abram is not being enriched, and it means that Abram is not also having to play a moral subterfuge, just a oral one, right? Him saying to the Egyptians, she's my wife, with this story, so they don't harm him and they don't take her, is the way through. Does anyone think that would be a morally problematic thing for him to do?
No,
No.
he's not giving her off or anything, or they're not even taking her.
Right. Nor is he getting any benefit from it.
And they can just live as if they're married and no one will notice.
No. Spencer, you're not reading this. They're not saying that they're married. They're saying that they're brother and sister. But she is married to somebody else who has abandoned her. It explains why they're together and she's not married.
Oh, so they're
and why she can't marry anybody else.
They're still brother and sister in this.
They're lying that she's his sister. They're lying that she's married to somebody else. But they're not reaping any benefit outside of not having her taken from him and not having him killed. Which is different than she is my sister, she is unwed, and I'm open for business. Which is how the story plays out.
This one's not so bad.
This one's not bad at all. The challenge is that it isn't borne out in the verses in the story. Jack is going to shoot me down.
No, I'm not. I just wonder, was it common practice that if you were married to a beautiful woman, somebody would kill you to take her? Was that? I mean, this is the first time we hear of something like this. You would think if she were married that they would leave you alone.
So we're going to get, that's the operative question, Jack. I want you to hold your question because we're going to explore it in the text. So Nachmanides, and if you studied Ramban, whereas Rashi would say short answer is like he wanted to get presents, Nachmanides' commentary is a long-running commentary that weaves through the verses. So he's going to take us back to the whole story in the beginning and get us to where we are. So now Abraham went down to Egypt on account of the famine, to dwell there in order to keep himself alive in the days of the drought. Okay, fine. But the Egyptians oppressed him for no reason and attempted to take his life. Now he is midrashing, which is a nice way of making things up. The Holy One of Blessing avenged their cause with great plagues and brought him forth from there with cattle, with silver, and with gold. And Pharaoh even commanded his men to escort him from the land. So this is him looking at the whole story, right? Abram and Sarai go down there. They're minding their own business. The Egyptians harass him for her sexual value. God punishes them by plaguing Pharaoh. And Pharaoh, like the generations later on, is forced to escort Abram out of there with a bunch of riches. That's his big read on the story. He thereby alluded to Abraham that his children would go down to Egypt on account of the famine to dwell there in the land. And the Egyptians would do them evil and take women from them, just as Pharaoh said. And every daughter you shall save, but the Holy One of Blessing would avenge their cause with great plagues until God bring forth with silver and gold and sheep and oxen, very rich in cattle, with the Egyptians pressuring to send them out of the land. Nachmanides reads the story of Abram and Sarai right into the story of what? Moses and the Exodus. Right? What happens in the story of Moses and Exodus to the men? Kill the firstborn sons. Protect the women. Take them and save them. What happens at the end of the story of the Exodus? The Israelites leave. How?
Running for their lives.
Walking and then running for their lives. But what did they take with them?
Matzah.
No, yes, but that's not the answer to my question.
Musical instrument.
They had that, no.
Families, their families.
They robbed the Egyptians on the way out the door. An often untold part of the story.
I didn't know that.
As part of the preparation for leaving, Moses basically says to the Israelites, go to your Egyptian friends and ask them to borrow their jewelry. Borrow! They don't know we're leaving. Borrow. Do you ever wonder when we get to the story of Truma and the building of the tabernacle? When God says, bring us all of your gold and silver, where in the world did 400-year slaves get gold and silver from?
I was wondering that.
The answer is in a verse often skipped over in chapter 12, 13 of the book of Exodus. The Israelites go and borrow gold and silver and sheep and cattle and oxen from the Egyptians. And then when they off in the middle of the night, they take it with them.
It's reparations.
Very clever.
Very clever. Right. Beginnings of anti-Semitism, perhaps. Right. The Jew is the untrustworthy taker of things. Right. But here we go. So Nachmanides sees the same sequence of events. Oppressed Israelites, Pharaoh wanting to preference women, leaving, escort, if you had a drone, you might see the story as the Israelites being marched off by the Egyptian army in the Exodus story, and having taken gold and riches from the Egyptians on their way out the door. There is a parallel to be seen if you look at it from that perspective. Now, nothing was lacking in all the events that happened to the patriarch that would not occur to the children. It's the exact same story. Right, as we in Bereshit Rabbah, Rabbi Pinchas said in the name of Rabbi Oshai, in the name of the Holy One of Blessings, that Abraham, go forth and tread out a path for your children. Thus you find that whatever is written concerning Abraham is also written concerning his children. In connection to Abraham, it was written there was a famine in the land. In connection to Israel, meaning the Israelites, for 2 years there had been a famine in the land. Now, here we get to the hard part. Know that Avraham Avinu, Abraham our father, unintentionally committed a great sin by bringing his righteous wife to a stumbling block of sin on account of fear for his life. He should have trusted that God would save him and his wife and all his belongings, for God surely has the power to help and to save. His leaving the land, concerning which he had been commanded from the beginning on account of the famine, was also a sin he committed. For in famine, God would redeem him from death. It was because of this deed that the exile of the land of Egypt at the hand of Pharaoh was decreed for his children. In the place of justice, there was wickedness and sin. There's a lot rolled up in this. All right. What sins did Abraham commit according to this passage from Nachmanides? Spencer, what's one?
He didn't trust God, he left.
He left where?
Canaan.
He left Canaan, right? Why was it a sin to leave Canaan?
He should have trusted God.
What was he supposed to do? Stay there, right? God said, go to a land that I will show you, the land of Canaan, right? But there was a drought. But Nachmanides is saying, doesn't matter, right? This to me recalls the Moses and the rock and the water,
Yes, yes.
right? Have faith that God will provide. Often in our story, our leaders, their sins are sins of lack of faith, right? That when they are faced with a pragmatic challenge, they respond with a pragmatic response. And God says you should not have responded with a pragmatic response. You should have responded with the faithful response. So that's sin number one, or sin number two, but sin number one, which is leaving the land of Canaan in the first place, going down to Egypt. And then what's the second sin? Pimping out his wife, according to Maya. Right? Whatever you want to say, trafficking his wife, selling, he is engaging in either adultery or bigamy. He doesn't live in a world of ethical non-monogamy. Right? And by the way, I don't think it's ethical non-monogamy, right? Because in order to be ethical, what do you need?
Everyone needs to be aware.
You need awareness and consent. And do we have Sarai's consent?
No,
Not
no awareness.
Or well, she's aware, she's
No,
told
but
what
if
to
Pharaoh's
do.
not aware, that would be a requirement.
Pharaoh's not aware as well.
In ethical non-monogamy, that would be a requirement.
Right. So we have these multiple sins. Yeah, Maddie. And then
Where
Jack.
does the understanding that we are human come in? Cause humans
We
make
sin,
mistakes.
right? So if we sin and then we have to do what?
Yeah.
Right? This is not damning to hell. This is just acknowledging that these actions on Abraham's behalf were sins, right? This doesn't answer the question, what is the consequence? It's just, well, actually, that's not true. It does name the consequence. What's the consequence, Marilyn?
The children.
The children,
The children.
right? Visiting the iniquities on the generations that come later. Because Abram sinned in going down into the land of famine, what's the outcome? His generations later on, the generation of Jacob and Joseph, would then be struck with famine and have to go into the land of Egypt, and their outcome, enslavement. Right? Now, it's very medieval, it's very sin and punishment, but it's very much keeping with, within our tradition. Jack.
I've been kind of interested in understanding God's position. Now, God didn't tell Abraham not to leave. He just said, go down, where he did tell Isaac not to leave the land of Canaan, which is an interesting sequence of events to me.
Well, remember that there's no sequence in Torah. It's all just one big story, right? Meaning, if God's instruction to Isaac was not to leave the land, that instruction is temporally universal, meaning it applies to everyone. That Abraham should have known better.
No, well, Abraham had a choice.
What's the first thing that he did? As soon as he got there, he made an altar, he made a sacrifice, and then what did he do? He left.
Well, we don't know how much time existed there.
That's true, but I can tell you how much time did pass. One verse. One verse passed. I'm talking about chapter 12, verses 7, 8, and 9, when Abraham is building this altar at Bethel, first at Haran and then at Bethel. In Genesis chapter 7, Genesis chapter 8, Genesis chapter 9. And the moment there is some discomfort in this new land that God has told Abram to go to, right? That's verse 10. There was famine in the land. He leaves. So you're right, Jack, to say that we don't know how much time passed, but nothing else happened in our story. And that is what Nachmanides is pointing out is one of Abram's sins. That the moment things got difficult, and I can agree with you that he did not necessarily transgress, right? He didn't go back to Ur. That would have been a direct transgression of the command to go to Canaan. But he went the other way. He moved on. He went farther. He was told to go to Canaan. Is Egypt Canaan? Is he fulfilling God's instruction to go to Canaan? And then he left. Right? So
Just because you're not told not to do something doesn't mean you're absolved of doing it.
Well, it's, and again, I'm not a lawyer here, right? But it's like, even if we're going to say that he did not transgress, he didn't fulfill. He moved out of the state of fulfilling the command from God, right? Like when we get later into the mitzvot, we know that we have positive commandments and we have negative commandments, right? You can live most of your life in fulfillment of the negative commandments. Anybody murdered anybody today? How about yesterday or the day before, right? And you can live a whole life not murdering until you don't anymore. And the moment you commit murder, all of your life of not murdering kind of goes out the window. And that's how negative commandments work. Positive commandments are a little bit harder to evaluate, right? I have a positive obligation, as do all of you, to give tzedakah. How much do I have to give? How often do I have to give? When have I fulfilled my obligation to give tzedakah?
10%, the tithe offering.
How frequently?
Every annum, because.
Every, right, so the idea is like, have I ever really fulfilled my mitzvah of tzedakah?
Probably
No.
not, to human, no one can afford that right now.
It's not even that, even, you can afford whatever you want, even the recipient of tzedakah has an obligation to give, and tithing is one interpretation, but my point is that from like a philosophical perspective, these affirmative obligations, they are never retired, right? The time-bound ones are, right? I take off my tefillin, I take off my tzitzits when I have prayed, right? And those are time-bound. But these untime-bound ones, like give tzedakah, there's always more that I could be doing, and I have never really fulfilled that obligation entirely. So we have this instruction from God, go to Canaan. When can Abram leave Canaan? The answer is, we don't know. God didn't say. But Nachmanides says Abram didn't ask. The sin is in not wondering. The sin is just going and moving out of the land of Canaan, out of the state of fulfillment of that instruction. And for that, Abram was rewarded, right? Like, what's his punishments? Wealth. But the generations later on get punished with enslavement. I want to move forward and I'll come back to you.
Don't come back, man.
So now Nachmanides gets into our operative verse, please say that you are my sister. I suppose, and this answers the question, Jack, that you raised, which is, what do we know about the ancient Near Eastern world about whether or not their fears were real? Now I can say, Jack, that my answer is going to be the one that Nachmanides gives, which, who knows how historically accurate his position is, right? Who knows how much he knows of the ancient Near Eastern world and what was the sociology of the time, but at least he frames his answer in a sociological manner. I suppose, he says, that Abram and Sarah might not have had this fear except when they entered at a capital city, since it was common to bring beautiful women to the king and arrange to have their husbands killed. Right? So if they were going to one of the suburbs, if they were going to a rural community, if they were going to somewhere other than where Pharaoh was, then Abram and Sarai's concern that they would kill him and take her might not have been real. But Nachmanides suggests that this was a thing to be feared, that in that time, at least in the capital cities, that they would often take beautiful foreign women to the king to be wed to and dispense with their husbands. But, Nachmanides says, I think Abraham and Sarah must have acted this way ever since they left Haran. Everywhere they go. This isn't the only time that Abraham and Sarai pull the sister wife thing. They do it later in chapter 20. The text only mentions it when something came of it. Right? And so what Nachmanides is suggesting is that throughout their journeys, Abram and Sarai have an understanding, right? An understanding that Abram has created and that Sarai is going along with, either because she wants to or because she knows that if she doesn't, he's going to harm her. We don't know that's the case, but this is how they operate, right? This is a team of tricksters.
Bonnie and Clyde.
Bonnie and Clyde, exactly. And so when in our verse, when Abraham tells her, said, you're my sister, he's just reminding her of the game they got going on. Anyone here watch The Sting?
Yeah.
Right? We're playing the long game.
Fantastic movie.
Great. In the straightforward sense of the text, it appears that Sarah did not agree to say this, right? Because she doesn't say anything. But the Egyptians were extremely evil. They took her to Pharaoh's palace without bothering to even ask if she was his wife or his sister, right? There's no record of a conversation between the Egyptians and Abram, no record of a conversation between Abram and the Egyptians and Sarai. They just take her, and she kept her mouth shut. It was Abram that volunteered that she was the sister, which is why it went well with him. The biblical heroes are not portrayed as demigods or perfect human beings. They are mortals of flesh and blood, subject to the same temptations and possessed of the same frailties as are all other human beings. Abram, the man of implicit faith in God's word, is fearful of the evil of which people are capable. In order to save his own life, he appears to place his wife's honor in jeopardy through misrepresentation of their relationship. Sarai's collusion may be looked upon as an act of self-sacrifice on behalf of her husband. But how is Abram's conduct to be judged? I have to note that the worst use of the word honor here is really bothersome. It glosses over the reality of what Abram is asking Sarai to do. He is asking her to subject herself to being raped by Pharaoh. And I want to name that.
He also isn't really asking, I mean.
Well,
Yeah, the wife just does.
if this is the running game that got going on, oh, by the way, I forgot to know, we have moved from the 14th century to the 20th century. This comment is from Nahum Sarna, the editor of the JPS commentary on the book of Exodus and the book of Genesis, right? This is no longer Nachmanides. This is, the teachers of our teacher, right? Nahum Sarna passed away, but his son you may know of is Jonathan Sarna, the great scholar of American Jewish history and Jewish history. So this is his father, a great biblical scholar. So he is reading this with a postmodern lens, late 20th century, right? This was published in 1989, right? And even in 89, he's using euphemisms like his wife's honor, right? As opposed to the forcible marriage and the forcible, the conjugation of that marriage that she's going to have to subject herself to. So he's asking, right, like, we may celebrate Sarai in her act of self-sacrifice, right? Which at least we're naming that she's making a sacrifice. But how is Abram's conduct to be judged? Ramban comments that no, our father, and this is what we said, that he inadvertently created a sin by placing his virtuous wife in a compromising situation because of his fear of being killed. So, Maddie, your question, are you ever allowed to sacrifice one's virtue for someone else's? In a world of faith, the answer is no. He should have trusted in God to save him. His wife and all he had, for God has the power to help and to save. Right? That's a biblically oriented answer through the lens of postmodern ethics, which is, even though he was doing it for the right reason, it was wrong. And it was wrong in a world where faith was frankly probably more meaningful in that generation than it is to Sarna's generation or to ours. Right? A world in which God did actually intervene in appropriate times.
It's also, to me, a depiction that we are all to hear and maybe learn from, of, the imperfection of man, or fear, or self-preservation, or greed, or whatever.
Yeah.
Can alter someone's behavior even though it's immoral.
Yeah. Let's finish Sarna because we're getting short on time. As opposed to this critical view is the analysis of Radak, that Abram is confronted with a moral dilemma, forced to make a choice between two evils. If he discloses the truth, he will be killed. And his wife, beautiful and unprotected in an alien society of low morality, will assuredly be condemned to a life of shame and abuse. If he resorts to subterfuge, she may be violated by some Egyptian, but at least husband and wife would both survive. It would have been improper then to have relied on a miracle as an excuse for inaction. That's Sarna reminding us of one of the biblical commentators. Whatever might be the shortcoming of Radak's interpretation, the moral problem that faced the patriarch was very real. His decision involved a conflict between human life and human dignity within a hierarchy of values. The condescending view of some modern commentators that it is unfair to judge Abram's behavior by the supposedly superior moral standards of today is based on a confusion of chivalry with morality. He's talking to me. He's talking to me, right? Let's not be so quick to judge Abram, because like what I am suggesting is that he should have subjected them both. He should have subjected himself to death and her to the same outcome, but less handsomely rewarded. Let's not just grant that's the better choice. Right? This is a trolley problem, but you're on the train and you're on the tracks. One last gloss. The Women's Torah Commentary, 2008. Our generation, our teachers, my teachers, women who are people I respect and have learned from. This section is a variant of a tale in which the patriarch deceives a foreign ruler by telling him his wife is his sister. The deception leads to an improvement in the trickster's status, but the deception is uncovered and they are summarily dismissed. They depart, however, with their newly acquired goods intact. The tale portrays Pharaoh as a dupe and deals with the us-them theme in a humorous and thoroughly traditional way. This passage is not a tale about unethical behavior, but a story of a marginalized persons who succeed in a roundabout, unorthodox ways. In both such stories that improve Abraham and Sarah, Sarah proves to be the reason for Abraham's increased wealth. I'm surprised at how apologizing they are for Abram, but they are also reading into this the part of the story I didn't fully flesh out, which is that the rabbinic understanding is that the consummation of the marriage of Pharaoh and Sarai never happened.
But she was.
Wait, that's the rabbinic understanding?
Yes.
That's a big leap.
Are they men?
What's that?
Are the rabbis men?
Yes. The plague
Greg,
piece.
Oh.
And that Pharaoh was stricken with venereal disease before he could consummate the marriage with Sarai. And that's when he realized something was up. So her virtue stays intact and everyone gets out okay.
What was it that afternoon?
hey, Greg,
Huh?
What did they
Right.
say?
Never mind.
Oh.
Jack, go ahead. Last comment.
maybe God's intervention was to have Abraham do what he did.
Exactly. Right? That's the intervention potentially, right? God sends the plagues. Maybe that was the miracle that they were waiting for.
Oh, boy.
Right?
Big leap.
If you thought you were getting an answer to the moral dilemma, Shabbat Shalom. You're not going to get it. Thanks, everybody.
Who said that to Rabbi?
Thanks, Greg.
He has the public service announcement.
Public service announcement. Starting next week, I'm gonna be leading a circle where, anyone who wants can gather